Hey, it's time for TV Skywriter. Greetings, everybody, and welcome to TV Skywriter. I'm Pat Murray, your host, and I publish the Durham Skywriter, that's Durham, North Carolina's online community paper. And with TV Skywriter, I try to introduce you to people that I think are really cool and that you should know. And today's guest, now, as you probably know if you're a regular watcher, I would say half of my guests are local and the other half are from other cities and countries and whatnot. But my guest today is local. Jessica Thompson is the president of Friends of Geer Cemetery. And you might say, that's an odd thing to talk about, but it won't be odd. Keep listening and watching. Welcome to the show, Jessica.
Thank you, Patricia.
Absolutely.
It's great to be here.
And feel free to call me Pat.
Okay, Pat.
No problem. I can't remember when I met you, but I know R. Kelly Bryant was there, and he's the super renowned local historian, RIP. But I know I met you through him.
He was at our house for a Friends of Geer Cemetery meeting that you came to, and that was, what do you think, 5, 10, somewhere like that years ago?
It was a while back. It was a long time ago. And basically, I wanted to learn more about the Geer Cemetery because I had set off thinking that it was on Geer Street. And I bet a lot of people think that when they hear of Geer Cemetery, they think it's on Geer Street, but it's not.
So that's the logical conclusion, right?
Yeah,
Geer.
Geer is an important street, but it's not on Geer Street. So tell us about Geer Cemetery because you live basically right across the street from it, right?
Yeah. So let me see. I'm going to try to encapsulate this short in a quick way so it's not too dull because I get really bogged down with details sometimes. Geer Cemetery is from segregation times, an African-American cemetery in Durham. It's probably the largest one. It has been known as Geer Cemetery, City Cemetery, Mason Cemetery.
Mason?
Yeah. And it was opened officially in 1877, which is the year that Reconstruction ended.
Okay.
And it was closed by the health department around 1944.
Okay.
Although I have heard that there were some burials after that.
Okay.
So they were probably in the, I don't know exactly how they slipped those in, but
well, maybe they had connections.
Yeah.
You know, people wanted maybe their loved ones to be together or something.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So do you think, because I'm trying to figure with my not being from Durham and not knowing all the history, what about the people who were enslaved, because that's after, slavery had ended. So do you think the enslaved people were buried in there too? Because I'm trying to figure that out.
Most certainly, some were buried in the existing, and what we know from 1908 of the death certificates, but even before that, there was a map that was drawn of Durham. Mr. Blount, I think, drew the map from memory of Durham from 1861, and he placed the cemetery in this area at that time. So there was something here then.
So the way you told me, if I remember correctly, is that the land kind of belongs to no one right now, but it was donated to the city to be used as a Black cemetery decades ago.
Well, yeah, it was sold to 3 men representing the African American community, Black community in Durham at that time, 1877, by one of the relations of a founding father of Durham, Frederick Geer. His brother Jesse sold the land to these 3 people. And we think that the people represented like a burial society from 3 different churches in Durham.
Okay.
For the sum of $50, it was 2 acres at the time. And yeah, so it was, Yeah, I hear you saying it was sold to the city of Durham, and yes, it was.
Okay.
I think it was. My goodness. So I've just
Mm-hmm.
made another discovery, and that's what happens all along the way. Um, it's really hard to see outside of the bounds of white privilege sometimes, and I appreciate being helped to see outside that. I think that's what just happened because,
I don't
I,
know.
I was thinking a burial society for African Americans in what was then Orange County.
Okay. That's right, because Durham came from Orange County. They divided it up, apparently.
Yeah. So when it was sold, it was Durham, but it was still in Orange County.
Okay.
And so it was sold, I guess, to the African American community in the county, and that because of segregation,
Mm-hmm.
um, nobody really thought of that as being officially sold to the county. And I
Okay.
didn't think of it until you just pointed that out to me. So I apologize for my
I,
ignorance.
I'm just no, I'm just taking guesses because again, I'm not
Yeah,
from here, and
but you're right.
I just wanted to point out to people watching that Durham's history is quite interesting in that we also have an ancient Jewish cemetery. It's on Moorhead Avenue, and so I guess segregation was not just simply white and black, but we also again had a Jewish cemetery. It's still there. It's on Moorhead. You can actually see the gates and everything, and actually walk around in there. And
Yeah,
Geer is actually open too, right? I mean, you can just go in, right?
yeah, it's totally, I mean, it's so, in many ways it is open because nobody claims ownership right now. So if you want to take your backhoe in there and start uh, building a road um, or resurrecting headstones or digging holes in the cemetery, whatever, um, at least you can do that. But hopefully, I would
Don't
run
give
it.
anybody any ideas.
Oh God, no! Please, I didn't mean to do that. I'm just saying,
Yeah.
I'll run across the street and stop you immediately if you start doing that.
Yeah. Now, because officially it hasn't been in use since the 1940s, I'm wondering what shape it's been and what shape it has been in past years, because that's something that's very important where you've played an important part. Um, so tell us about that.
I wish I had pictures to show you of what it looked like when we moved in here in 1999. Um, it was a jungle. It was a
Mm.
wisteria jungle, and it was beautiful because wisteria flowers are so gorgeous.
Mm-hmm.
But there were only a couple visible headstones and a sign
Mm.
that R. Kelly Bryant put up on the corner of McGill and Colonial Street to say that it was a cemetery and giving the dates. And that's the only way I knew it was a cemetery.
Wow. What kind of sign was that? I'm sure it's not the sign that's up there now, right?
The old metal sign, it has red letters that they faded now, but
Mm-hmm.
it was a small um, metal sign. He um, got some kind of adhesive letters which he adhered to the sign, and it says Geer Cemetery. I think it just says Geer 1877 to 1944.
Mm-hmm.
It may
Let me
say
write
Geer
that down.
Cemetery.
1877 to 1944. Now, people don't know who R. Kelly Bryant was, but
Okay.
I mean, people who aren't from Durham, let's put it that way. Um, he was an amazing man. I wish you could tell us a little bit about him. I got to meet him. He came on my show years ago, but he was known as the preeminent local historian, right? What can you add to that?
We got to know our Mr. R. Kelly Bryant Jr. pretty well, and he called himself Junior all the way till he was 95 years old,
How
which is
about that?
really something. Yeah. respect for his daddy.
Mm-hmm.
So we got to know him pretty well because we had these meetings of Friends of Geer Cemetery, which he had started in I think about 1985.
Oh.
And he got a cleanup going at that time with Walker, the Walker gym at North Carolina Central.
Leroy Walker?
T. Walker. Yeah,
Yes. Okay.
he was involved in the first cleanup with
Okay.
Mr. Kelly Bryant. And then so that finally happened, I think, in about 1993.
Mm-hmm.
And so then when I got concerned about the cemetery and found Kelly Bryant by making a lot of phone calls and to the city and calling White Rock Baptist Church and so on. I'm trying to answer your question in a short way.
Oh, no, take your time. This is good. This is good stuff.
So I met this man who was small and wore a suit every time I ever saw him. He wore a suit and he has a beautiful smile, and he had the greatest sense of humor, but he was so soft-spoken, and his sense of humor was so cool, dry, that he would tell a joke, and if you weren't listening carefully and didn't get the joke, he didn't laugh himself, so you wouldn't know he told a joke, so you had to pay close attention to what he was saying. And sometimes he would say things that were sort of offbeat, like somebody in the neighborhood he lived in cut their grass with scissors. And that was funny, but I didn't think it was funny. I didn't know, But I guess he was like trimming up the edges. He was doing the edges with scissors. And I don't know, just other things that
he was a great guy. And just to illustrate how old he was when he died, he worked with my grandmother in the ordinary department of North Carolina Mutual Life Insurance Company. And my grandmother was born in 1899. And she's long gone. And he only died a couple of years ago.
Yeah. Oh my goodness.
Yeah. I never saw their picture together, but I know that they were in the same office. I think he was her boss or something like that. She was I'm not sure what my grandmother was. I think she was a secretary, but she worked and if people are wondering what the ordinary department is, that's like when you have life insurance policies, at least back in the day, the ordinary department were the ordinary citizens as opposed to business insurance or, business and company insurance. These were the everyday people who they would go door to door to sign them up for life insurance policies. That was the ordinary department.
Oh, okay. I'm just looking at these pictures of I thought there was a picture of some people in the North Carolina Mutual building in this book I have here, and I was looking to see. Yeah. But it's not Kelly Bryant. Somewhere I've seen a picture of Kelly Bryant, but this is can you see it? No, not really.
Yeah. Hold it up to the camera. Yeah.
Can you see it now?
Oh, yeah. I've seen that picture.
Okay. Yeah. So that's from this Durham County book by Gene Anderson, which I've used as a source.
Yeah, my grandmother wasn't in that picture, but she was working there at the time. Yeah.
Yeah.
I know that picture. And actually, she retired once in the 20s to have children. And I got the letter that she received from one of the founders of North Carolina Mutual telling her, like, you've been a good employee and good luck and all that sort of thing. And then apparently she went back to North Carolina Mutual, I guess after she was done, after she had her third child, I guess, and which was my mom. And then I think she retired in the early 50s. So that's my connection to R. Kelly Bryant, was through my grandmother. And also, again,
thank you for telling me. Go ahead. What were you saying?
Oh, and just the pleasure of knowing him. And he was just, I'll tell you something amazing about R. Kelly Bryant. Now, he was probably in his 90s when I showed him this picture of the North Carolina Mutual Glee Club. My grandmother was a member, and it was like 24 people. He went through the picture, pointed at each person, and knew their name. This was in the 1920s. He was able to recall every single person in that picture. So you can tell he made a wonderful historian, because he had a beautiful mind, as they say. He was brilliant, and he remembered everything.
And did you know about his autograph collection?
Oh, no.
Oh, he collected autographs from every event that he went to. So yeah, he's got all kinds of autographs, and I think that's in the North Carolina room now. Oh gosh.
Of the Durham County Library. Now,
yeah.
He also was known for having a fabulous funeral program collection.
Yes.
He was definitely known for that. I think he even had my grandmother's funeral program. He had everybody's funeral program. And I think the North Carolina room of the Durham County Library, I think they were able to receive those and add to the collection. And actually all of my papers are, I shouldn't say but my family's papers are housed in the North Carolina room as well. And actually, even though we're supposed to be talking about Geer Cemetery, I'm just going to take this opportunity just to tell people to learn to value the old papers and whatnot that are lying around your house, especially if you're here in Durham. It's not uncommon for when people die, for people just come in and just throw everything away in their haste to clean up the place or sell the house, or maybe they just don't realize the value of old papers. Sometimes they're out of towners and they have to take care of things quickly and get back home because they can't take off too much time from work. So if you have papers, and when I say papers, I mean the Durham County Library values things like funeral programs. I'll tell you what I had in my collection: report cards, my mom's aunts and uncles' report cards from the 30s and 40s, newspaper clippings, any kind of programs from church, meetings, events. When I say meetings, I mean sorority, fraternity, church, missionary, whatever. Anything that's in print that's historical, the library would be very excited to get those. And because I'm childless, I wanted to make sure that when I die, because my family's still in Chicago, so I don't know if they're going to have time to go through my stuff and figure out what's worth keeping and what's not. So I actually contacted the Durham County Library, and their housing, they were thrilled. Believe me, they were very happy to get these papers. They cataloged them and put them in special envelopes and all that kind of stuff. I just wanted to take the time to do that because there are so many people who have wonderful pictures and programs and things that their family might not want to be bothered with, that the Durham Library would love to have. So I
have a question about that, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Do you think that African American families save those things more because there isn't as much written down African American history available for children to learn from?
I think it's a good reason to do so, but I think just knowing the Black folks that I know that hold on to everything, it's just, families is so important. I'm not saying that it's not important to other folks, but it's just so moving just to hear stories. I'm from Chicago. When we would come down here to North Carolina and listen to my granddad's stories from days of old, that was thrilling. You know, just holding on to your history. You don't see your history. And I think you're right. You know, we don't see our history necessarily on TV and movies. But then again, you don't see anything about Lithuanians or Polish people or anybody really. When you really think about it, most people's histories are pretty much forgotten or left out. And I'll bet you they hold on to their history as well. At least I hope they are. So I just think that it's just really important. There's another quick story. I was a college kid. I was going to Talladega College and visited my folks here in Durham. And my aunt tucked me in and she threw a quilt over me. And I said, "Oh, this is pretty. Where'd you get this?" And she said, "Your great grandmother made this." I was like, oh my God. She had died way back in the 40s. I never even got a chance to meet her. People love that stuff. I just think people maybe, I mean, I don't know if Black people are special in this. I mean, I've known of Black folks who've thrown everything out when someone died too. I just think it takes a sensitive person who appreciates history. That's all. Regardless of race. I think all of our histories are worth saving. But in particular, I think the reason why, for example, Duke University, they have my grandfather's mother's autobiography and poetry. And just think, my granddad was born in 1885. So you can imagine, this is a long time ago. And Duke University went after my aunt to get this autobiography because they realized the value. A lot of times Black folks either didn't write things down like she did, because I mean, she even named the slave owners. She knew all the history and she wrote it all down. And that's very valuable to
really valuable
to educational institutions. And what Duke did was to put it online. So you can actually look up Elizabeth Johnson Harris, and actually you can read her autobiography right there online.
Wow.
And people from all over the world look for it when they're looking to read about the lives of African Americans during slavery time or right after slavery times. So, and I am taking over this conversation. I didn't mean to, Jessica.
Well, I'm just really interested. I want to ask you one more thing. Have you, you know about Alice Walker's story about the quilt?
I know Alice Walker is, but I don't know about the quilt. No.
Oh, okay. Well, you definitely need to read that story. It's I'll find the title and send it to you. But Alice Walker wrote a great story about a college-going person and a homestaying person, and the homestaying person slept under the quilt. And when the college-going person came back from college, she saw the quilt and she said, you can't use that quilt, you know, it's so it's special, it's so unique. And they had a totally different, it was just about the academic view versus the just home folks view, you know. And it's just a really interesting problem that Alice Walker was dealing with in that.
Yeah. Wow.
Anyway,
so let's get back.
It's not about Geer.
but let's go back to Geer Cemetery. So I'd like to know, because you have studied the history and you've done so much research, and I'd like to know, why does Geer Cemetery fascinate you?
Well, the real reason it does is because when I grew up out in Durham County in the woods, and my father and I used to take these walks in the woods, and we found a cemetery out in the woods. It had a little gate around it. It was small, maybe about 10 by 10, and it belonged to the Pickett family. And as in Pickett Road.
Right. I didn't know about it, but yeah.
Yeah. So we lived right near this cemetery. It was just an old ancient cemetery. I think I remember Termesia somebody. And I was 5 years old when we found that, or younger.
Mm-hmm.
And I just got fascinated. Like there were people here before me that now they're in the ground, and I wonder where their spirits are, and I wonder what their spirits have to say. And I would stand by the screen door in the back door of our house when the wind was, right before a rainstorm, the wind is blowing, and I would think the spirits are blowing in the air.
Wow.
And so it was just,
You had.
well, yeah, I still have one like that. Anyway, so when we looked at houses in Durham, we were looking to move here, and we found this house right next to a cemetery, a historic cemetery that was just like, oh, we're home. At last, we're home.
Mm-hmm.
And it's an old house. And then when the cemetery turned out to be an African American cemetery, I was like, oh, it's exotic too. And so, that's how I got interested in it in 1999.
Mm-hmm.
And then I never really, it was just covered with wisteria for a couple of years, and finally got in touch with Kelly Bryant in about 2002.
Okay.
And about 2003, Kelly Bryant and I and the Friends of Geer Cemetery lobbied the city of Durham to fund a cleanup program.
Mm-hmm.
And so TROSA was organized to do the cleanup, and it was hot, and it was just incredibly, I would have not been able to do that. Like, I think they did a lot of it. They did some in May, but they did a lot of it in July. It was really hot. And they had to cut all those vines out of there and everything. And the men from TROSA found all kinds of interesting things that they showed me, like slate headstones that didn't have any markings, and they found a headstone that was given by Benjamin Newton Duke in honor of his a woman who had worked in his household for, I guess, her lifetime, named Mary Sparkman.
Okay. Oh, that's B. and Duke. Yeah, B. and Duke.
Yeah, Benjamin Newton Duke. Yeah. At Central University, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Wow.
And yeah. And then,
of course, I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No, please.
We're not all Durhamites here. The Duke family, Duke University. Okay, go ahead. Just wanted to point that out.
Thanks. Yeah, and so I just want to, as things come into my head, I have to get them out so I don't forget them.
That's great.
So Friends of Geer Cemetery have sponsored several different cleanups over the years in the cemeteries. Once TROSA cleared out all the vines, then it was just a matter of, when trees fell down or limbs fell down, picking them up, and gradually more and more clearing the cemetery so that people can actually go in and visit the graves.
Have you heard from any older African Americans, like, for example, people from Russell Memorial or White Rock or St. Joseph's or Union Baptist Church?
Well, I've heard that not really older, unless you call me older, which you could do.
No, not in people who might have family there. Because I have a few family members who are buried in there.
Yeah. So, for example, Dee Dee Barnes, who is a Durhamite, she has family buried there, and she is the descendant, the daughter of Ernie Barnes, the
Oh, the
painter.
artist. That's what I thought. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. And so his grandfather or father, John Wesley Geer, was a black descendant of the White family.
Okay.
The Geer family.
Okay.
So that's a complicated story, and
But
that's a lot to say about that. Pardon me?
All too common. It happens.
Yeah. Well, and I sent you, when we were talking about this interview, I sent you a quote from Thomas Jefferson, which I think just reveals maybe how the founding fathers of the United States, how their thinking was not really that we are all created equal and that we're all human beings. I think they thought that propertied white men were human beings. And then there was sort of a hierarchy, and propertied white men were at the top of it. And Thomas Jefferson's quote is, I don't have it right in front of me, but basically he's saying that the best investment for a slaveholder is a woman, a black woman, because she can produce children, and children bring income. Yeah. So
that's a little cynical.
I'm sorry, but I'm a cynic.
Yeah. No, I meant the statement is cynical.
Yeah.
Yeah, not you.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, not you. But wow. So what state is in Geer Cemetery now? Is it tidy and does it look nice now?
It looks nice-ish. It looked really nice last spring when Jaquez Harrell came in and did his Eagle Scout project there. And he put Chapel Hill gravel on the U-shaped lane that goes through the cemetery. He placed 2 cement benches, one on each side of the cemetery by the lane, so you can go in and sit down and contemplate things. And he also, I think, helped to reset some of the stones. And since then, a lot of stones have been reset and some new ones placed by Friends of Geer Cemetery working with. Yeah,
this definitely send another shout out to him. His name is Jaquez, you said?
Yeah, Jaquez Harrell.
Yeah. Now, he did this alone or with the other Boy Scouts?
He did it with his family. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Harrell family. Nice.
Yeah. And he has like a little brother that he's hoping when he comes up to be do his Eagle Scout project too, he will also do his project in Geer.
That's beautiful. That is beautiful. Now, when it comes to regular upkeep of Geer Cemetery, have you, or as the president of the Friends of Geer Cemetery, are you able to have the city or the county or someone to keep it tidy?
No. I'm sorry to say, there are leaves all over the lane now, so you can't even tell that there's a gravel lane going through the cemetery. And there are trees and limbs that have fallen down. There are some trees that even have been cut down and fell on top of some stones and knocked them over. So
wow. And we did have a couple of hurricanes last
right.
Not direct hits, but strong winds and storms.
But I do want to mention that Keep Durham Beautiful has dedicated several of their work days over the last 5 years or so. So, they go in there with a volunteer group, either from Durham Tech or from some other local nonprofit. And and community volunteers and carry out limbs and saw up trees and carry out stumps and all kinds of things. So
That's
if
really
it weren't
nice.
for Keep Durham Beautiful,
Mm-hmm.
you wouldn't even be able to go into the cemetery now.
Wow. So let's shout out Keep Durham Beautiful as well, as Tanya Dotlick, for sure.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Here's what happened when I was in college. Again, I went to Talladega College. That's in Talladega, Alabama. It's kind of rural. I mean, very small town. And I can't remember which class it was exactly. But anyway, Mr. Franklin, he wanted us to connect with the community. So I think this was freshman year. So he tossed us all in the back of a pickup truck, and we went to the old black cemetery in Talladega County, and our job was to clear it. And we also learned about the history of African Americans or the whole history of Talladega. And it was moving to me because my family and the Stricklands are still down there. My family on my dad's side are from Talladega. So it really moved me. I don't know about the other kids, but I would like to see something like that happen with North Carolina Central University, since it's also an HBCU. I would love to see a freshman class every year hop on the back of a pickup truck, go down to Geer, and clean it up a bit and learn the history. In fact, I still have some bamboo in my kitchen that I picked up when we were clearing, the old cemetery in Talladega. I still have it, and that was from the mid 70s. I still have it.
Wow,
So
that's great.
Yeah.
It meant a lot to you. It means
Yeah.
a lot to you.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, now Central University, there's an early E. Thorpe History Society, and they did come out one time and do some work in the cemetery, and we had a little event. It would be great if they were more active in the cemetery.
Yeah. Now there's an early. Now I know as family we call ourselves play cousins, but there is an early Thorpe lecture every year at Stagville.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it wasn't at Stagville last year. I'm not sure where it was. I don't think it was at Stagville, but anyway, maybe they can call out for volunteers or get people involved somehow, in his honor. Because he was the head of the history department at North Carolina Central University. So maybe
working with Dr. Helen Edmonds.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, she helped him a lot, right? She was the head chairman for a while, chairwoman.
Okay, I didn't know her. Edmonds, isn't that
Dr. Helen Edmonds?
Okay.
Oh, okay.
The Edmonds name is familiar to me. Does that have anything to do with the newspaper, the Carolina Times?
Yes.
Oh, everybody's connected. Well, I would like to see this happen. I don't know. I'd be happy to help you.
Yeah. Okay. Great. That's a great idea. Yeah. Let's do that.
We can at least try.
And I want to say also, before I forget it. Oh, I did forget it, but it'll come back. So,
okay.
We can talk about something else, and when I think of it, I'll tell you.
Okay.
Oh, yes, I know.
Okay.
A connection between Stagville and Geer.
Okay.
There is a website, a genealogy website supported by Durham Orange County Genealogy Society, or DOGS anyway.
Yeah.
That lists the 1,600 some burials since 1908 in Geer Cemetery. And this was created by the research committee that was formed when Mr. Kelly Bryan and I first got together on Geer Cemetery in 2002 to 2003. So so what I want to say is in this list of names is Cornelius Amy.
Okay.
And
Amy Funeral Home.
there you go. That's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
I think now the Amys were the earliest enslaved family on the Benahan plantation. They came along, they were given as a gift to Mary Amos upon her marriage. So they came with her to the plantation, and their descendants there's a foundation of a house behind the Benahan plantation house that I think was their house.
Wow.
And then, so I think what we can do is draw a straight line from Stagville Plantation all the way, Benahan Plantation, all the way to the Amy Funeral Home, which I think is incredible. I think it's, it's
that's
such
amazing.
Beautiful.
Go ahead. I knew the Amy Funeral Home was Black owned, but again, I didn't know the connection to Stagville. And I'm just throwing out Stagville so casually. For those of us who aren't from Durham or living in Durham, historic Stagville is a state historic site. And the Benahan family, I guess they ran the plantation. It was huge. Didn't you tell me they had 900 enslaved?
Yeah, at the largest point, right before the Civil War, they had 900 enslaved workers on that plantation. Amazing. Yeah.
So you can actually go on tour and see historic Stagville, and it's hard to find Black people who've been there, because I think that at least the Black people here that I know, and I don't want to disparage everyone who happens to be African American, but there seems to be, I don't know if it's disinterest or shame, but it's very hard to find someone who has been to Stagville. And very often when I ask someone, wow, have you seen Stagville? It's incredible. And they're like, their reaction is always almost always negative. But I want to encourage people to go. It's not all about slavery. I mean, it is about slavery, but it's really about resilience, and it's about brilliance, because the major building on historic Stagville is the Great Barn. And it was built African ingenuity by people who we found out later, because the tour guides, and you used to be a tour guide, I think.
Yeah, it was.
The tour guides told me that some.
Let's see. Can you see the Great Barn? There's a picture of
it. Yeah, that's it. That's it.
Right there.
Yeah, it is incredible. Now, here's the thing. It was built by Africans, and there are no nails. There are no screws. There's no mortar. It's incredible. It has withstood tornadoes, hurricanes. It is incredible. And Africans, I just have to say Africans because I don't know what country they were from, but tour guides have told me that Africans have visited the Great Barn and looked up and said, oh, we use that same technique. That's really a boat. So in essence, they built a boat on land. It's boat building techniques, which again, no screws, no nails. It was all just ingenuity and obviously hard work, because it's huge.
Right. It's amazing.
Yeah.
And it's there's another thing I just wanted to say. Well, while you were talking about people being ashamed of slavery, there's no reason that people should be ashamed of slavery. If somebody comes from an African descent, that person should know that Africa was the cradle of civilization. Africa was the first people came from Africa. Africa had the first universities, the first civilizations, and all of the intellectual and creative and cultural resources that came out of the African experience enriched the United States and has enriched the United States. And in a lot of it is stolen, but what I'm saying is, how do a people survive the kind of brutal chattel slavery that we had in this country? How do they survive it? Only by being incredibly resourceful and incredibly creative. And so there's two things I want children, especially Black children, to know. And one is that Black history does not start with slavery in the United States.
That's true.
And the second thing is that, oh God, I guess just that it must have taken such amazing resources to survive that.
Yeah.
And so,
you're absolutely right.
Yeah. Okay.
You're absolutely right. So I really encourage, and not just Black folks, I think everybody.
White people need to be educated. Lord, don't we? And there's one other thing. I'm sorry, Jabber.
No, go ahead. I was just going to say, I think immigrants should see it because it's an interesting experience, and that we weren't technically immigrants the way they are immigrants, and it's just a different perspective. It's a lot of them don't realize. They might know about slavery and a little bit about civil rights and hip hop, but they might not really know how deeper history goes. I think it would be very interesting for immigrants to see it as well.
When I was a tour guide there, we had a tour of people from China, and they were looking around, and at the end, I think I might have posted something on Facebook or a picture or something, and they said, "Oh, Facebook, we can't even use Facebook." And so it dawned on me that slavery is existing in China today. So anyway, they
have their own version of Facebook. I can't remember what it's called, Huawei or something like that. But basically, they're all about, controlling what their citizens hear and learn about. So, yeah. So, and I think Facebook is collaborating with them to, to do a safe Chinese version for the Chinese population of, I forget what it's called, but yeah, it's all about control.
Control
of thoughts. Once you control the thoughts, you got them.
That right, and that
goes for us too over here.
Right, that goes back to and for me as a tour guide at Stagville, just the windows in the house that overlook the yard.
Mm-hmm.
They have a sense of power and authority that people are always going to be watching us.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a control thing. That's what it was done for, the way it was built. And so another thing at Stagville that you can see is the fingerprints and a child's footprint even in the brick chimney of
I made a point of putting my thumb over a thumbprint that I saw on the chimney to explain. The chimneys are original because they're stone. I believe the wooden parts through the years have disintegrated and have been replaced, but the chimneys themselves were built by Africans, and you can see their thumbprints in the mortar. And it's very moving to notice that and to place your thumbprint over someone else's thumbprint who was from Africa, from way back in the day. At least to me, I'm such a softie. I just love history. I love all that stuff.
Well, so I want to get back to Geer a little bit.
Yeah, please. Sorry, we're wandering all over, but it's all connected, though.
Yeah, it is. That's the
Connected.
thing. It is. It's all connected.
So why should we know about Geer Cemetery? Because it has been forgotten through the years. I'm so happy for your work and the late R. Kelly Bryant's work in keeping it foremost in certain people's thoughts, at least, and on Facebook, because you're on Facebook now. Please follow them at Friends of Geer Cemetery, and make some comments and get involved, and even volunteer if you're in the area. Volunteer your work, and I'm sure you could use a couple of donations.
Sure.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Tell us what you need.
Donations. Well, first of all, I mean, donations can go to Keep Durham Beautiful, and they'll be used to help tidy up the cemetery, and tidy up the headstones. And then, of course, we always can use volunteers on Keep Durham Beautiful work days to help us clear the limbs and the trees and the leaves out of the cemetery. And then also genealogical research. There's, with so many people buried there, if everybody grabs a name and goes to their genealogical resources and starts researching that name, then we get to start finding out about the people buried there and telling the stories. And the more stories we can tell about the cemetery, the more we can bring the cemetery to life and, really educate people about the hopes and dreams and accomplishments of the people buried there.
I like that idea a lot. And I can start with the people who are related to me. There's some Atwaters in there, and I heard there's some Banks in there. And I'd be happy to figure out who it is that's buried there. Because you said most of the gravestones aren't really marked like the fancy ones of today. Right.
There were some little metal plaques, but they had paper inside them, and the paper has deteriorated over the years. So yeah, there are a lot of unmarked graves. And I think a lot of times this is probably why the health department closed the cemetery. I'm not sure that their rationale was really very scientific, but because there was such a small plot and so many people had to be buried there because it was city cemetery and there was no other place for African Americans to be buried, that there are some family plots, and they're basically named for a patriarch or a matriarch of the family, and then there are several, I think, burials in the same spot.
Okay.
As we said earlier, because people wanted to be buried with their family.
Okay. Now, of course, people who are living in Durham today know that Beechwood is considered the African American cemetery now, or at least one of them.
Right.
It's the only one. Isn't it considered the only Black cemetery? I'm not sure. That's where my family's buried.
Well, there's the Fitzgerald Cemetery, which is part of Maplewood, and then
okay.
There was the Crest Street Cemetery and the Violet Park Cemetery.
I know about Crestwood. Okay. I mean, the community Crestwood. I didn't know they had a cemetery. Okay, because they do have a church over there.
Yeah. Union Bethel was probably involved in the purchasing of Geer Cemetery in 1877, by the way.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah.
So I'm sorry. I wanted to say some names. No.
Sure.
There's just one little connection that was fabulous you have to hear about.
Okay.
A headstone had fallen down. Ron Bartholomew of Durham Marble Works, who works in partnership with the Friends of Geer, organized to reset the stone and do a little workshop on how that's done, how that's done properly so it doesn't damage the stone. And I advertised that, I think, on Facebook or somewhere. And oh, I know what it was on. It was in a newspaper article. There was a big picture of Gussie B. Sharon. And lo and behold, Manetta Howland reaches out to me on Facebook. Manetta Howland, I think she was a descendant, like Gussie B. Sharon was her aunt or her great aunt.
Okay.
And so she came for the resetting of the stone. She came from Tacoma Park, Maryland, down to Durham to see it and lay flowers on her grave.
Isn't that beautiful?
It was a wonderful experience. The connections.
That's why I want you guys to follow Friends of Geer Cemetery, especially if you have connections to Durham. Who knows? Again, I have a few family members buried in there. I don't know exactly how many, but I'll try to find out. And I just think this is really super interesting. Do you have any more pictures to show us by any chance?
Let me see.
Didn't you have a book that you wanted to hold up? I thought you had.
Well, I had. There's this book, which is Lay Body Down, and it has a story about Geer Cemetery in it that was told by a neighbor, Mr. Carpenter. He talks about how the cemetery was donated to bury a young farmhand who took a untrained mule out for a ride, and the mule threw the farmhand and dragged him, and he was killed. So that's a very sad story. But apparently that's the story about how Jesse Geer designated this area for a cemetery.
Oh, okay.
Then there's Piedmont Plantation is not the most up-to-date kind of book about plantation life, but it does have in the back an appendix with the names of all the enslaved workers who were purchased or came there by gift. And so for people doing genealogical research, that is a really helpful book. And then here's one. Proud Shoes is all about Durham history, and Polly Murray, who was the first African-American Episcopal priest and also a civil rights lawyer in Durham, and she describes how the community was right at the end of the Civil War, when people were just homeless and just wandering and trying to figure out where they were going to live and what they were going to do. And so I find that section of the book very important to Geer, because Geer was one of the men who started Geer. I've seen his census record. Yeah, so that shows all the people in his household, and he's got a zillion people in his household. And I'm thinking probably back in those days, if an African American was wealthy enough to have a large house, they took in a lot of different people.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
Probably.
So that's what I got from that. And then this is Gene Anderson's Durham County, and there's a lot about Geer Cemetery in there.
Okay, I have that one.
And you got to read this. This is To Free a Family by Sid Nathans. He was a Duke professor. I think he's not at Duke anymore. I don't know if you can see it.
He's way out west by Colorado. He was on my show when the book came out.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, great.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so and the woman who freed a family in this book, she was also related to the Amy family
Oh, okay.
that Cornelius Amy was
Okay.
related to. Yeah, so
Awesome.
these connections are really interesting.
Incredible.
And like, to me, Geer Cemetery has changed my entire view of Durham history. I started out getting interested in tobacco history because I had taught a class on it at Friends School a long time ago. And so that was all about the Duke family.
Mm-hmm.
But nowadays, the Duke family is peripheral to my vision of Durham history. And what a wonderful thing it could be for so many. I don't want to, I hate the term white, but that's it. I'm white, I guess, although I'd prefer to be peach. Um, but
Okay.
anyway, wouldn't it be wonderful if a lot of peach colored people
Mm-hmm.
could learn from the cemetery, come to the cemetery and learn from the cemetery, like plaques in the cemetery telling them about this history and that, this person's history and that person's history, and and to know the connections and to realize that American history is not all peach colored. I mean, I know I'm an old lady and that's probably passé, but I still think that we do not teach Black history nearly the way it ought to be taught.
I agree. I think American history in general, but especially Black history as well. Um, but when you really think about it, we don't hear about the Chinese presence in America either. We don't learn about the early Hispanic presence, especially in the West and Southwest. Most of this stuff is left out. Our American history is really pretty sparse to me.
And that's how we end up, not knowing, not
Not
realizing,
appreciating.
not understanding. And then we get in some serious trouble when we don't.
Yeah, yeah. And as far as Black history, now I'm not a mommy, so I don't really know what the kiddies are learning during Black History Month. But back when I was a kid, it was, of course, Martin Luther King was. I mean, he's historical, but he was alive when I was a kid. But what I mean is, what we would learn was mostly about George Washington Carver, and not a whole lot being, well, maybe Garrett Morgan or some other, renowned, intelligent, smart, cool people. But basically, just a handful of people we learn about with, just the stock phrases. I still remember the phrase that they would attribute to George Washington Carver. They point at his picture and say that he made 300 items from the peanut and sweet potato. And there's a lot more to that man than just that. But yeah, so even when we're taught Black history, very often it's very light and it's just on the surface.
I think if we could teach Black history in a more local way.
Mm-hmm.
For example, I think that if children could learn about Cornelius Amy, who came from Stagville Plantation and whose descendants were then involved in Amy Funeral Home, but further on in the future involved in the North Carolina Mutual Life Insurance Company.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, just basically in a period of 100 years, coming from slavery to being the Black middle class of Durham and very wealthy not just middle class, but some very wealthy people. And for children to look up and see that sign on top of the building, which I hope will still be there, but I'm not sure it will.
Yeah.
It would, I think it would make history more relevant.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
Yeah. Okay.
And I like the idea of the local focus. I think everybody should learn. Just like I'm from Chicago, we were taught just the basic bare bone facts about the beginning of Chicago, but we weren't really taught how to put the names and places together. Because fabrics of history, everybody's kind of interwoven. It's not always just the white folks over here and just the black folks over here. I mean, the histories actually do intertwine throughout America, and we don't make those connections, and it's kind of sad.
Yeah.
I want to ask you something real quick. I know we do have to go. We've been talking for over an hour, and I've been loving it. But here's my question. Okay, we mentioned historic Stagville. The plantation was much bigger than the historic Stagville State Historic Site. A lot of that land has been, I guess, purchased by other farmers or other people, and then there's a fancy area around there as well. And I think it stretched almost to Virginia. But here's the thing. I was told that another cemetery was found, and I think it was of some of the African people who lived on the plantation, but the cemetery ended up being on somebody else's land. You know how some of the land was purchased, so maybe the adjoining property was owned by somebody else, and then they found this cemetery.
Yes.
I was told that they're not really allowing people to have access to it because it's on their property, but it's surrounded by a fence or whatever. Do you know anything about that? And I suppose that happens a lot when land gets divided up and sold.
Well, I heard what you just told me. I know about that. And that's how it was when I was a tour guide at Stagville.
Okay.
But I have a vague memory of somebody telling me that the cemetery has now become a part of the state historic site.
Oh.
So I'm not sure if that's right, but I certainly hope so.
That would be great, because I'd hate to see it, bulldozed over or whatever. Every now and then you hear about people finding at old grave sites and treating with utmost respect, which I do appreciate. So that would be a good ending to that story. So how can we follow you and learn more about Geer Cemetery, Jessica?
Well, there is a Friends of Geer Cemetery Facebook group that you can join. And I think I made it open, so public, so that anybody can join.
Okay.
If I didn't, then I have to approve your membership, but I can do that. So please join. There's also a website called friendsofgeer.com. And that website is maintained by Alan Dew, who was very heavily involved in Friends of Geer when we first got going in 2003 and started the website. And he also has a listserv, which we use to announce events. So you can sign up to get emails about events. And we have a meeting coming up at Stanford Warren Library in meeting room 1, on February 16th, which is a Saturday. The meeting will go from 10 to 11 a.m. The room will open up at 9:30, so people can meet and mingle a little bit beforehand.
Okay.
And we have the room reserved until 12 o'clock, so that after the meeting they can do the same.
Excellent.
several stakeholders are going to be coming to this meeting. So it started out as it was going to be a board meeting. Now I think it's turning into a town hall meeting. I'm not
Nice.
sure, but
Okay.
yeah, so we'll just have to roll with the punches, and we'll be so happy to have people come and contribute and share their ideas and share what they want to do. And oh yeah, we'll really get some things going here.
Yeah, I want to come too. So I'll see you there. For sure.
Well, come on.
Well, thank you so much, Jessica Thompson, for being on TV Skywriter. And folks, I do. Oh, your husband is watching, right? Or
Yes, and
someone you know is watching. You want to throw him a shout out?
Hey, David. And David, I do sometimes call myself Jessica Thompson Eustace, which is my legal name. So just out of respect for you, my dear, letting you know. So David Eustace is watching me, and hey there, how you doing?
He's in the audience. Okay. So you know what to do, folks. If you're here in Durham, or even if you're not in Durham, follow join the Friends of Geer Cemetery. The way that Jessica told you. Also, definitely check them out on Facebook. At least do that. And I do hope that in Augusta, Georgia, and other places that have Black cemeteries that have been forgotten and overgrown and in horrible condition, I do hope that they can watch this show and learn as well. My family on my grandfather's side, they started in Augusta, Georgia. My sister and I went there to the Black cemetery. I think it's called Fitturn or something like that. And we wanted to sprinkle the ashes of our grandfather's youngest sister in that same cemetery. We could not find anything because it was so overgrown. It was in horrible.
Oh, no.
Yeah. So I want to implore, for example, Payne College, where my grandfather and grandmother met. My grandfather was a professor there. I would love to see them do it. We did at Talladega, and that is to have the freshman social science class or whatever class to go there, clear it out, and learn the history and get connected to the community. So I'm just going to try to contact the people at Payne and see if they can watch this show and maybe get some ideas, because I'll bet there's a lot of old cemeteries, both Black and white, that have been forgotten, with the names of people who are probably related to the people who are still in the area, and they might not even be aware, of their own history. A lot of people are you'd be surprised at how many people don't know their own family history because they haven't written things down.
Yeah.
So I think it's really deep, not just for the families, but for the whole community. So with that, thank you so much, Jessica, for being on the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's been a real pleasure, and I have so much more to say, so we'll have to do this again if you don't mind.
You're always welcome back.
Thanks.
No problem at all. So I'll say goodbye for now. Be sure to read Durham, North Carolina's online community paper. It's called the Durham Skywriter. You can read it at durhamskywriter.com. And if you'd like to be on TV Skywriter, you don't have to be local. You can be anywhere. I've interviewed people from and in Brazil, England, Afghanistan, Canada, whatever. If you want to be on the show, contact me and let's talk. And with that, good night, and I will see you later. Ciao for now.